to share with you some opportunities that you have as municipal leaders to take a look at the groundwater and source water protection things that you have going in Jackson, and also to take a look at and look for opportunities where maybe you can strengthen or take an advantage of existing programs that can further help protect local source waters. So this presentation was largely put together by Rich Brereton of FB Environmental Associates in collaboration with us at Shaw. And so he and I are going to share the presentation tonight. So you can advance the slide, Jeff. So basically tonight we're going to talk briefly about what is your town's vision for clean water, to make sure that you have an understanding of what source water is and whose responsibility it is to protect it. We're going to discuss tools for municipal leaders and how the Saco Headwaters Alliance can help you, and then we'll offer some next steps as well. Advance. So we start with this image, and I'd like you to look ahead and imagine that it's the tricentennial, 4th of July, 2076. And as we look out on the world, we see that our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren are all living healthy, productive lives. They're living in a resilient environment with a robust economy and clean water. And you may ask yourself, how did we get here? And so this is where Rich is going to kick in and just tell you how we do get there.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And thank you very much, everyone, for your attention this evening. And by the wonders of modern technology, we are able to overcome our technical difficulties here. Jeff, if you could advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. So as Mark mentioned, I work for FB Environmental Associates in Portland, Maine. Interestingly enough, I'm also without Spectrum service here in downtown Portland, and so the outage is pretty widespread over Cumberland County here, because my wife at home also is without internet about 20 miles north of here. So this is working well, and I hope you can see this presentation well enough. But I will share a copy of it afterwards, in case anyone would like to double back and take a closer look at these, these visual aids or these maps or anything like that. So as Mark mentioned, this work is funded by a local source water protection grant from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. So you might ask yourself first, what is source water? It's a jargony term from the world of public water and regulation of drinking water. But it really just refers to natural water from lots of different kinds of water bodies: streams, rivers, lakes, reservoirs, groundwater. All of these are used for drinking water in different parts of the country, and they're all source waters. So in Saco Headwaters Alliance, in the Saco Headwaters, which is mapped in the center here, you can see it's a roughly circular watershed with Conway more or less at the center, and it's a region blessed with abundant water resources, with abundant source water. In this one watershed, there are over 1,500 miles of rivers and streams. There are 140 named lakes and ponds, and countless more unnamed ones, smaller ones. There are two major stratified drift aquifers, one underlying the Upper Saco and the Swift confluence, and one underlying the area surrounding Ossipee Lake, right about at 6 o'clock if the watershed is a circle. And just to be clear, and lastly, at least 70 square miles of wetlands. As Conservation Commission members, one of your biggest charges is the protection of wetlands. And of course, many of these wetlands are not connected to larger water bodies, but many more of them are associated with rivers, lakes, ponds, and they are important groundwater recharge areas in many cases. And then it's important as we think about this region that as an operating whole, a watershed where everything drains to one central point, somewhat arbitrarily defined as that confluence of the Ossipee and the Saco, that from there the Saco flows to the Atlantic Ocean and serves as a source water to many other communities. Saco and Biddeford, right at the mouth of the Saco where it meets the Atlantic Ocean, being a perfect example of somewhere where what happens upstream certainly matters to the safety and quality and quantity of the drinking water that they receive there. So the watershed operates as a unit, and it's also nested inside a larger watershed. And just to be clear for everyone's benefit, since this is an educational presentation, the watershed is a unit of the land's surface that everything drains to one point. So in the schematic figure on the bottom left of this slide, you see the dotted lines mark the ridge lines of a valley, and everything that falls on the river side, or the inside, if you will, of the watershed drains to that river, and everything that falls on the other side of that dotted line drains to a different watershed. Next slide, please, Jeff. Thank you. So what does this mean for your town? Well, Jackson is similarly blessed with abundant source waters. Not so much in the form of stratified drift aquifer, though it does make up 3% of the town area, and so is shown in this map in areas colored as blue. You'll notice that those stratified drift aquifer areas tend to follow the river basins, and that's because they are sediments that were left behind as the glaciers melted in the last glaciation of this region, the Pleistocene, which ended about 12,000 years ago. And that's a gift left behind by the glaciation, that in the form of these sand and gravel aquifers that are remarkably productive when you sink a well and draw water out of them, and they recharge quickly. And so there are abundant stratified drift aquifers in this little slice of the greater Saco Headwaters watershed. But in Jackson, you also have surface water protection by virtue of your forested uplands, many of which are protected in the White Mountain National Forest. And the Ellis River is a perfect example, with headwaters partly in the White Mountain National Forest, and that serves as the source water for the Jackson Water Precinct. In addition, you'll see there are these perfectly circular areas, which are wellhead protection areas. So those are delineated based on the size of the well and where it's estimated that the well will be recharged from. So the water that hits the surface that will infiltrate into the groundwater and eventually serve as the source of that well is theoretically protected within those perfectly circular wellhead protection areas. Next slide, please, Jeff. So source water protection is the kind of the first line of defense in providing clean water at the tap. And you can see the flow from step one at the top right of this slide, source water protection, where forested uplands are the most common and the most effective way of filtering rainwater and making sure that no contaminants are introduced on water's journey as rain or snow, and it's into infiltration in the groundwater, and then to eventually to either surface water flow or to where it's collected in a well, and that sets up the rest of the system for success, from water treatment to inspection to testing to distribution, and then finally to the tap. And of course, all of those other steps are points along the way where contaminants can be introduced into drinking water. But through these multiple barriers, the and where best practices can be implemented, you end up with a pretty resilient system, a pretty redundant system. And the goal of source water protection, obviously, is to prevent any contaminants from entering the drinking water system in the first place. This little cutaway image on the left illustrates, a hypothetical situation where contaminants are introduced into the subsurface and then they flow along groundwater flow paths, roughly downhill, or following topography roughly, and that can vary a lot. The subsurface is very complex, depending on whether you have an aquifer or you have fractured bedrock, and all sorts of different things can happen. But this schematic, sends home the idea that what goes into the groundwater won't stay put; it will migrate, and so that needs to be considered when siting where your water is going to be sourced from. Next slide, please, Jeff. So another piece of jargon, public water systems. This is the terminology of the Safe Drinking Water Act, which is the major federal law that protects drinking water, that regulates drinking water systems. Most communities in the United States have multiple public water systems. Despite the name, it can be either publicly owned or privately owned. In the case of your town, you have the Jackson Water Precinct, which is a municipal department, I believe. Sometimes water precincts in New Hampshire are quasi-municipal independent water utilities. Sometimes they're owned and operated by the town itself. And then there are also private utilities that are, for-profit companies. Maine Water is a local example for us. So, and then there are different categories of them. The differences between the categories are just that at the top, community systems serve the largest populations, and they have more exposure, therefore, to whatever's in the water. And they are the most regulated, as you might expect. Community systems have to produce consumer confidence reports that if you're served by one of these, you might be familiar with the community the confidence report arriving in the mail around the same time each year. And they can be sourced from surface water, they can be sourced from groundwater, or they can purchase. Community systems, any type of public water systems can sell water in between. And it's important to keep in mind, it's not just the source, it's also the pipes, all the conveyances, the pump stations, and the distribution networks that get water to the tap, all of which are part of the public water system. You can advance, please, Jeff. So by law, public water systems do get assessed. Their source waters get assessed. So that's, either the wellhead protection area or the surface water protection area. This table is really dense. I'm not expecting you to read or remember everything that's in here, but it's a list prepared by New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services of public water systems and their different sources and their susceptibility to different vectors of contamination. And these inspections were required by law by the most recent amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act. So they ended up happening in the late 90s and early 2000s. And that's, in fact, the most recent time when these source water areas were inspected and assessed for various different types of contamination. And so I just want to point out these on the right, there are columns for different vectors of contamination, and the susceptibility of any given source is ranked low, medium, or high, L, M, or H. And the Jackson Water Precinct is the first one. And so it's ranked on all these different susceptibilities. But this kind of systematic comprehensive assessment hasn't been redone since the 2000s. Now many public water systems do have periodic inspections, but this is the last time that this data was published, and that a comprehensive effort was made to survey every single public water system. The last thing I want to call attention to on this table is one of the columns is PCSs, another is KCSs. Those stand for potential contamination sources and known contamination sources. Potential contamination sources, PCSs, emphasis on the word potential. Those are lots of different land uses, and we'll define them actually on the next slide. So maybe Jeff, if you don't mind advancing. Thank you. There's a lot on this slide, so let's start on the bottom right. The definition of potential contamination sources is any facility or activity that stores, uses, or produces contaminants of concern which could find their way into a source of drinking water. So they're not sites where there's been some proven spill or some other introduction of contaminants into source water, but they are activities or facilities that are required to be identified and periodically re-identified or reassessed under law. But the way this actually plays out is in piecemeal fashion. The state does have the authority to regulate these things and inspect them and require best management practices, but the type of level of effort that would require and the political difficulty of impinging on people's private property rights is an area that the state does not have the will or the ability to pull off. So they do things in a bit of a piecemeal fashion. They fund some assessment work in grants like this program that funds my ability to come speak to you tonight. And I'm showing you actual results from a 2017 survey that was carried out by myself and some others in the same 8 towns of this assessment. And there were 2 existing sites within the database, and there were 5 new ones identified. The survey was limited to just the areas that are shown in blue here, the stratified drift aquifer areas and the wellhead protection areas. And these potential contamination sources, or PCSs, are broadly defined, but it comes down to things like gas stations and junkyards and road salt storage facilities, bulk fuel terminals, though I don't think there are any of those in Jackson, but places where substances or contaminants are handled or stored or transferred that were they to spill could contaminate water that public water systems rely on. So these are the kinds of facilities that source water protection is very concerned with, because not every source water can be perfectly protected or perfectly left undeveloped in perpetuity. Many of these sites, these potential contamination sources, predate the source water protection area, and as long as they're operating by the best management practices that they're required to by law, that threat is avoided and minimized. And so it is a matter of state law for them to follow best management practices, but unless a community enacts specific regulations around this, they don't have the authority to enforce state law. So a groundwater protection ordinance or district overlay is one way that the state law can be enforceable at the local level. Next slide, please, Jeff. Thank you. So I want to convey that source water protection has this multifaceted set of benefits that sort of stack upon each other, and I'll explain what I mean. There's the obvious public health benefit that you have fewer contaminants in your source water. You don't have as much need for water treatment, and that minimizes the risks, the real risks that come along with certain forms of water treatment, like chlorination. And it's also a buffer from unregulated contaminants, which are a whole class of contaminants that EPA is not required to set standards and require testing for. There's a list of unregulated contaminants that EPA is required to update every 5 years, that the sole reason that a contaminant ends up on that list is because EPA has deemed that it is likely to need regulation in the future, but they're not required by the Safe Drinking Water Act to regulate them on any given time frame. So source water protection gives you extra protection from those contaminants you might not even know exist in other sources of water. But the other benefits aren't so obvious, and they're economic benefits and they're community benefits. The economic benefits are tangible. You get affordable drinking water, which is often less expensive to protect the source than to treat it, and you get the added benefits that come with open space that support clean water and healthy forests and other open spaces that provide recreation opportunities. And then the community benefits are intangible, but they include taking pride in local clean water and local resources, public trust around this essential service that many in the community benefit from, builds community relationships. And then you also have the benefit of retaining local control over community assets like open space and like the local water utility. Next slide, please, Jeff. Thank you. So this is just an illustration of how these benefits stack upon each other. At the bottom is protected source waters. The next tier up, if you will, is clean drinking water, healthy rivers and lakes, and protected open space. Above that, you start to get to even more tangible benefits like affordable water access, public health protection, water-based recreation, land-based recreation. And atop those, with certainly other things supporting these that are not shown on this chart, you got a robust economy and at the very top, a thriving community. So this is what I mean by stacking these benefits on top of each other and reaping the rewards of more than one impact of your source water protection. Next slide, please, Jeff. So briefly, I'll run through what actually protects source water. The Safe Drinking Water Act gives the EPA authority to regulate drinking water. Public water systems are the unit of regulation, and there are over 148,000 of these in the US. So it's a very decentralized industry. For all of those 150,000 or 148 to 150,000 roughly, they're required to follow drinking water standards, and they're required to test and self-report on an honor system. Their water quality data to prove that they're providing clean, high-quality water. And the Safe Drinking Water Act also enables these recurring funding sources that fund state drinking water programs. They fund New Hampshire DES's activities, and eventually make their way to grant programs like this local source water protection grant. Next slide, please, Jeff. And then at the state level, the New Hampshire DES Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau is the entity that's primarily responsible for administering the Safe Drinking Water Act. And then there's a New Hampshire companion law, I believe it's called the New Hampshire Safe Drinking Water Act. And so this Bureau of DES regulates all the public water systems in New Hampshire, of which there are over 2,700. So equally, fragmented and decentralized in the state. And this Bureau also administers the Groundwater Protection Act, the state law that implements groundwater quality standards. So slightly different, but certainly related to drinking water quality standards. Drinking water quality standards apply to all sources of drinking water supplying public water systems. Groundwater quality standards apply to even those groundwater sources, groundwaters that are not public water system sources. And this same act also is where the best management practices for potential contamination sources is required by law. Next slide, please, Jeff. Okay, so there is a lot of delegation of authority from these federal and state laws to local governments. And local governments really play the role of stewards of their own resources. And this plays out in many familiar municipal processes that many of you are involved in on a day-to-day basis. Planning and zoning, siting of residential, commercial, and industrial development, municipal water and wastewater utility operations certainly have a direct effect on the quality of source water in your town. Next slide, please, Jeff. So specific tools at your disposal to protect source water include, and this list is not exhaustive, but they include zoning and overlay districts, such as a groundwater protection district, which other towns in the region have enacted. And I know there has been some initiative in Jackson, but I'm not sure about the current state of that. So I'd love to learn more about that, the process. And certainly zoning and new overlay districts are often a politically contentious and yet very effective tool to protect source water and groundwater more generally. And then the next bullet here is site development guidelines. Broadly, I'm speaking of site plan and subdivision review, where it's an opportunity to implement cost-effective protections and practices, best management practices often, that maximize the benefit you get from the, from any added cost to a given project. Land conservation is another tool I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. In water supply lands, this can look like the transfer of development rights. This can look like conservation easements, or outright acquisition for which is often a tool of larger water utilities. And then monitoring is an often overlooked but hugely important tool for ensuring continuing water quality and an investment. And I'll explain what I mean by that if you continue to the next slide, Jeff. Thank you. So monitoring for water quality is the collection of data on water resources or relevant watershed data, such as land use, land cover data. I'm sure many of you have firsthand experience collecting this kind of data. It's your eyes and ears to detect changes in the environment, and in this case, in water bodies, changes that aren't visible to the naked eye, but are visible to a lab instrument or a handheld sensor. And it's also a safe investment that pays dividends. And some examples of what I mean are if monitoring is used to create an early warning system of water quality problems, you can use that early warning to intervene and prevent future costly cleanup or tough planning decisions like capital improvement, like increased water treatment. And the key point here is that it's always good to start early and keep that investment going. It's like a savings account. You start measuring indicators of ecosystem health and your aquifer or your surface water, and that provides a baseline against which you can detect even small changes and interpret those changes for what might be changing in your source water. Another example is that you can use monitoring data. You can leverage it for municipal income for these purposes, for water protection purposes. You can use it to apply for grants for watershed planning and implementation funds. Through the Clean Water Act, there's a several programs, most associated with Section 319 of the Clean Water Act that provides at the state level grant funds dedicated to restoration, planning for water protection, and then implementing measures to protect water. So it's an investment that produces returns. Next slide, please, Jeff. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Mark to go over kind of the role of the Saco Headwaters Alliance. Mark, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. That was great. And so the Saco Headwaters Alliance, as I mentioned earlier, is a relatively new nonprofit in the area. And, our primary mission is to protect and conserve water resources, to promote a sustainable, resilient watershed and ecosystem, the 1,300 square miles in New Hampshire and Western Maine, to identify and address growing threats and assure, resources for successive generations for this region, and to provide leadership for watershed scale efforts, but also to serve as a partner and a broker and a facilitator for funding to help make some of these things happen. And that's a model that we've been pretty successful with over our 1.5 years of existence thus far. Go ahead, Jeff. So one of the first things that we did was we wanted to identify the data gaps. What information do we have? What information do we lack? What do we know? What do we need to know to make decisions to prioritize on how best to protect our water resources on a watershed scale, on an ecosystem scale? And Rich was the primary author and compiler of this document, the Watching Our Waters report. This is something that we will circulate with all of you after the meeting. This analysis was completed in 2020. It basically details what existing monitoring data there is, identified needs for actions to guide protection, management, and sustainable use of water resources. There's also a link to be able to download it, but it's a great document with a lot of information in it. Next. So, as Rich mentioned, the role of the local government, is to help identify on the local level things that you can do to strengthen the water resource protections in your town, and collaboratively, if all the other towns in the area are doing similar things, we will be collectively protecting the watershed. So there are 3 gaps in ordinances, zoning, and regulations: data on stream crossings related to infrastructure, culverts, and bridges, and data on potential contamination sources. And the recommended actions for these are scientific and planning studies, ordinance and policy review, and then education, outreach, and partnership building, which is part of what this presentation tonight is all about. Next. So in our 1.5 years of existence, we've accomplished quite a lot. We, under the planning category, we've been planning for regional water resource protection. I mentioned the Watching Our Waters report, which is now complete. There is a multi-agency project going on now in the Kearsarge Brook and Saco River watershed plan that is a collaboration between the NRCS, National Resource Conservation Services, National Fish and Wildlife Federation, and the Greater Level Land Trust, and the Saco Headwaters Alliance. And that's the project that's shown in red in the center of the screen. There's also, we've recently been able to secure funding for Saco and Swift Rivers Corridor Management Plan, which will update and totally revise the corridor management plans that were put together in the early 90s by the early efforts of the Saco River Local Advisory Committee and the Swift River Local Advisory Committee. We've also implemented projects to fill key data gaps on threats to water quality. And in the introduction, I didn't mention, but I also chair the Board of Selectmen in Harts Location. And Harts Location was able to work with the Saco Headwaters Alliance and take advantage of a funding opportunity that they presented to us, basically a Clean Water State Revolving Fund loan forgiveness program of $75,000. And Harts Location applied and secured that funding. And we were able to do comprehensive floodplain mapping in our town. When the 2013 Carroll County floodplain maps came out, they stopped 500 feet beyond the Bartlett border into Harts Location. So I always felt that it was ironic that the headwaters, the source waters of the Saco weren't included in the regional floodplain maps for the area. And as a selectman of over 20 years, that has been a high priority for me, and I'm really excited about it. And I've been asking the state for help making it happen for years, and nothing ever happened. And then when Saco Headwaters Alliance identified this funding source, I got some help with the grant writing application, and we got the money and we got the work done. So that was really exciting. And right now there's a stream crossing assessment initiative that involves a lot of other organizations as well as the Saco Headwaters Alliance, but it's driven by a need to identify places in our infrastructure that both contribute to water quality, but also infrastructure damage with changing climate, increased storms and severe flooding. We have culverts that blow out and cause erosion, and that deteriorates water quality, but also sometimes roads wash out. We've all seen it, Hurricane Irene and the Felipe storm in October of 2017. So this is an ongoing project, and we're currently working on an economic development aid grant that would address that in a very large way, including a feasibility study for finding funding sources to implement those stream crossing changes. And then, we're educating and facilitating clean water partnerships like this project. Next. And I mentioned earlier the stream crossing assessments, and this is something that's going on across the state of New Hampshire. And you'll notice that there's not many green dots in Jackson at the moment, and that this is work that is actually going to be coming your way. You'll be hearing more about it from the North Country Council if you haven't heard it already. But basically, they're looking at all public stream crossings, both culverts and bridges over rivers and streams, to identify where there are compromised stream crossings that are either compromising water quality or have the potential to compromise infrastructure and regional transportation, all of those things as a result of say a flood that washes out a bridge or washes out a culvert and a road gets undermined or buckled and has to be closed for a while. So you can see all the green dots in Harts Location over in the top center. Those are all stream crossings that were analyzed this past summer by the North Country Council. And so this is going into a statewide database that is used to help prioritize funding for restoration and modernization of stream crossings, culverts and bridges. So you'll be hearing more about that in the months to come.
Mark, just a quick question. Is that also looking at AOP, aquatic organism passage?
Yes, it is. And that's a great question, Ken. And, that's Fish and Game is also involved in this project. And there's a lot of places where there are hanging culverts where aquatic organisms can't move upstream because of erosion that's occurred because of an undersized culvert that causes a large gushing during flooding events that erodes a pool and then creates a vertical drop between the culvert and the existing body of water. So yes, that is an important component, and that is work that's happening across the state. Unfortunately, the Saco River watershed is the last watershed within the state that hasn't had this comprehensive stream crossing assessment work done. And as I mentioned, there are, at least 4 organizations right now that are collaboratively working to bring this map up to date. And this is in the state granite database, the New Hampshire Aquatic Restoration Mapper. All right, next. So again, what we can do to help you is we can help you identify some of your local and municipal clean water priorities. We can help you find funding and grant opportunities. We can assist with writing grants. We can assist with implementing projects. And at this point, we're doing that all on a no-cost basis to the communities in our service area. And I mentioned as an example, the floodplain mapping project we made happen in Hart's location. We got about 2/3 of the town done with that project last year. This year we went for another round. We got funding for that as well. So we're going to complete the floodplain mapping in Hart's location, and we funded the corridor management planning project for the Saco and Swift Rivers corridors. And that was all using the Clean Water State Revolving Fund for planning. And then there's the local source water protection grant that funds this project. And as I mentioned earlier, the federal source is the Economic Development Administration, and that's who we're trying to work with now to come up with funding for a really comprehensive stream crossing initiative. And we're also working with the North Conway Water Precinct on that. But I'll also say that before I got involved with Saco Headwaters Alliance and through the Upper Saco Valley Land Trust, Hart's location was presented an opportunity to learn more about the groundwater protection ordinance. And that's something that this presentation is hoping that you'll take a look at as well for your community. And we ended up passing the model groundwater protection ordinance in Hart's location. And, we're very proud of that, but it's also something that in order for it to be effective, all of the communities within the Upper Saco headwaters really need to pass it because what gets spilled in one area passes on into another area. During one of our public hearings, we had our most northerly residents say, the gasoline I spill in my yard ends up in your drinking water. And that's so true, both locally and, regionally as well, and really important. But I also want to just touch on, one of the challenges that we had passing the groundwater protection ordinance was the whole notion of the potential contamination sources ended up putting some of our businesses in Hart's location immediately on the defensive. And the point is not to put them on the defensive, but just to help foster a sense of their proprietorship in being responsible for best management practices in treating the substances that they have on their property at their business that are potential contamination sources, of using best management practices to make sure that those substances don't make it into the groundwater. So, that was a lesson that we learned the hard way in Hart's location. And I really hope that if you folks proceed, with any sort of groundwater protection zoning or ordinances or overlay districts in Jackson, that you're able to learn from that experience that we had in Hart's location. And just make sure that, your neighbors who are business owners who might be identified as potential contamination sources understand that you're not treating them as doing something wrong. You just recognize that they have substances in their property on their business that you don't want in the water supply, and you want to work with them. And then one of the big advantages of doing that in your community, of having a groundwater protection ordinance, is that it gives you the local control, the local enforcement and inspection control that, as Rich mentioned earlier, the state has that authority, but in practice, they're not using it. So if you were to enact a groundwater protection ordinance or something of the sort, an overlay district in Jackson, it gives you local officials the opportunity to do inspection and site visits, to talk with those business owners about the potential contamination sources and materials that they have on their properties, and help them understand what the best management practices are to keep those materials out of the water system. So I think that's it for me. Next slide.
Thanks, Mark. That's great.
So I'm going to
And,
hand this back over to Rich.
all right, excellent. Thank you, Mark. So the last piece of the presentation here is to introduce a tool that we created, this team, the Saco Headwaters Alliance and FB Environmental Associates, to assist communities with identifying priorities, finding a place to start if a community is not already started on this kind of clean water work, and a place to find the best leverage points, the best places to intervene in aspects of source water protection, water resource protection that might need attention. And so we created a municipal self-assessment checklist for source water protection. This work was inspired by some of the work that's being done in Maine with coastal municipalities in preparing them for increased flood hazards with sea level rise and changing precipitation and changing intensity of storms. We applied that concept of a checklist to source water protection to go through lots of different aspects of source water protection step by step, and assist with assembling that information and starting those discussions from a mutually agreed upon point and a place of science-driven questions and solutions. So this self-assessment checklist has been introduced to a few communities in your area. This is my 4th meeting with municipalities, and we've had some good success using the checklist to quickly assess the current state of source water protection in communities. So strengths and weaknesses, data gaps, and emerging priorities for water protection, and how they can be incorporated into plans, policies, and regulations. The checklist looks like what you see on the right. Specific questions that ask about data that's relevant to source water protection. They ask about specific vulnerabilities in your community to contamination. They ask about what types of planning documents and ordinances and other regulations and policies exist in your community. And they go through in a systematic way in different sections. And so the checklist is intended to be adaptable to communities of all sizes. You know, we're working primarily with a rural region of New Hampshire so far, and the communities that we're serving, the checklist is inherently designed to scale up, but to certainly as well scale down to the smallest and most kind of decentralized of community water systems and water sources. So we are offering as next steps to fill out a draft version of the checklist for you, to go through a rapid assessment of these different aspects of your community source water protection, and to do this in contact and working together with a town liaison who will present the draft to and make any needed changes, and then finalize the checklist, and then return for a follow-up presentation of 10 to 20 minutes, so shorter than tonight, of our findings and our recommendations, and provide and offer our services and our assistance in any way that we can. So with that, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your attention and for your participation in this kind of clean water work. And we look forward to whatever next steps are make the most sense. So thanks very much.
Thank you,
Mark.
as well.
Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, I apologize that we ran a little late tonight, and don't want to cut into the rest of your meeting, but we are available to ask questions either now or later by email or follow-up phone calls if you like. But as Rich said, we'll get that checklist started for you. We'll send it to you all along with copies of this presentation tonight and the Watching Our Waters report. And you can let us know how you'd like to take it from there.
Mark, a quick question. The focus so far has been on water quality. The state has also got an active program on water quantity, and a lot of people gloss over that. And the state has been prioritizing which river systems in the state's rivers protection program will be next to be analyzed for water quantity, and didn't know whether you've weighed in on that or taken a look at that.
Well, good question, Ken, and it's something that we're just starting to work on now. We're working with USGS on looking at doing a water balance study for the three major aquifers in our region. So the Saco aquifer, the Ossipee aquifer, and the Wards Brook aquifer, which, as many of you know, is where Poland Springs, draws their commercial extraction of water from. And the focus has been more on the aquifers than the rivers themselves. But we are right now looking for funding sources that would initiate a monitoring program so that we can, establish baselines and see what changes are happening over time, with the water balance in those aquifers and water quantity, as you say, in the associated rivers and streams.
Yeah, because DES has a whole protocol on that. You may want to touch bases with Wayne Ives at DES.
I can also speak to that question. Having heard directly from Tracy Sales, who is in the Rivers Protection Program at the state, that the Swift and the Saco are not yet scheduled, but are absolutely on the list of rivers that will receive in-stream flow protection. So what that consists of is a study of water use and hydrology of rivers to protect the minimum flow requirements for all uses, including aquatic life. So that kind of study is definitely on DES's radar and list of priorities. We don't know when and we don't know by whom or how comprehensive those studies will be, but it's definitely something that we're keeping tabs on.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you quick advice on that because I used to chair that committee, so I'm quite familiar with it. But periodically they'll go back and reassess which river systems in the state's Rivers Protection Program will come up next on that list, and you may want to try to get in the queue.
Great, good advice.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, thanks again, Mark and Rich. I see Bill has joined us from the planning board as well, and I was just curious whether you, Bill, or Scott, or Sarah might be able to kind of just refresh my memory and everyone else's memory on. I know that a year or two ago there was a fairly strong effort to work on the groundwater protection, the draft groundwater protection ordinance here in Jackson, and I think maybe at that point or at some point along the line, short-term rentals took priority, and I didn't know if the planning board had any intention of picking that effort back up or what we can do in that regard.
Jeff, I think I can speak to that a little bit, and Sarah and Scott are welcome to jump in. We did have it on our plan. We were looking to consider a model implementation for the clean water, and it just got put on hold because of the short-term rentals. And we've not picked it back up again because this COVID thing doesn't really make it easy to have discussions of this nature. At least we've kind of taken that approach, right or wrong, at least for the last while. But I would expect that we can do this, and Also, I think there's been some good progress in the past year. I think as Mark has mentioned, you guys have put together something where you've implemented one on your end. And so to the extent that things have moved along while we've been on hold, that could probably make our process a little bit easier. I don't think we're looking to invent the wheel here, but rather to get a good practice and get it on the books.
That's great to hear. And if I could just add a couple of points that we learned along the way. One was that the groundwater protection ordinance basically gives you local authority to inspect and educate and enforce existing state regulations, state and federal regulations. So you're not necessarily enacting rules that don't otherwise exist, but you're giving yourselves a local authority to go on site and speak with those business owners and property owners that have potential contamination sources on their property and make sure they're working with best management practices. And when we started the process, Hart's location is such a tiny town that, we had some residents who said, this is way broader than it needs to be for our purposes. Why don't we reinvent the wheel and customize it for Hart's location? And one of the things that was pointed out to us was that because it's basically enforcing existing regulations, that the only changes that you can make to the model ordinance are to strengthen it and to make it stronger than the existing state regulations, which is why we ultimately decided to just pass the model ordinance as it was prepared, and everybody got on board with that. I'd also say that Madison was the first town in our 8-town region to pass the groundwater protection ordinance, and Albany is working on it right now. And again, it's only really effective if all of the towns in our region pass it. So we really urge you to take another look at that when COVID wanes or when you have the opportunity to pick it back up again. It's really worthwhile.
Mark, you had mentioned that, and as a former landowner in Hart's location, I'm reasonably familiar. I used to have property up off of Camp Onion Road. My sense is that there aren't an awful lot of businesses in town, but you indicated that there were some issues. What kinds of red flags came up?
Sure. So when we had our first public hearing, the two potential contamination sources in Hart's location are the two grandfathered businesses within our community, the Crawford Notch General Store and Campground and the Notchland Inn. And the Notchland Inn because it had a large commercial septic system, and the Crawford Notch Campground also because of the large septic system, but also because of above ground storage tanks. And what we learned the hard way was that the presentation put those businesses right on the defensive from the get-go, and that was never the intention. The intention was to work with them to help make sure that they understood what best management practices are, so that they can help do their part to protect the water supply and be good neighbors in the community. But it was unexpected that we got such a defensive response from those businesses. So I just really wanted to point that out in the manner in which you present it to your community as you roll it out in a public hearing, for the planning board, looking at a potential zoning ordinance enactment, is to just make sure that they don't feel like they're being treated punitively just because they're a business contributing to the economy of your community and the region. It happens to be that they have materials that have to be handled properly, and you just want to make sure that they understand what the proper handling means. And its biggest impact would be on a new business coming in that had potential contamination sources, and that would require the most up-to-date best management practices like concrete pads and storage areas for toxic materials, that sort of thing. For existing businesses, the restrictions are much lighter, so long as they don't change the nature or scope of their business. And the most important thing is that you work hard to make sure they don't realize that they don't think that they're being targeted, because the point isn't to target the businesses. The point is for our whole community to work towards protecting our groundwater resources. And it's mostly geared towards commercial entities. But, one of the things in Hart's location, even though we're largely a residential community, the fact that we have this groundwater protection ordinance has heightened the awareness of our residential property owners as well. And everybody is aware that, we voted to take measures to protect our ground and source waters. And I think that has a community-wide and a region-wide benefit.
Great. Well, I don't want to, if anyone has any pressing questions, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, sorry, I just have one quick question. And you can think about this, but I was curious, one of the facets that you said the Alliance does was seeking out grant funding opportunities. And it looked like most of those were in relation to either project restoration or professional surveying. And I was just curious if there was any possibility for those same services in regards to partnering either with local schools or with local educational nonprofits, and looking at engaging students to in long-term water quality monitoring research projects. I have some very specific examples in mind. And so if that's something that you think that the Alliance would ever take on, I would be very happy to talk to you later about that.
Yeah, we'd be happy to talk further with you about that as well. And, we're not fully aware of all the funding opportunities that are out there right now, but we're becoming more aware as we grow. And certainly, anything that spreads the word about, the benefits of protecting our water resources and getting students and people involved in water monitoring. When you receive the Watching Our Waters report, you'll see there's a lot of work to be done in terms of data gathering and monitoring. And we need all the help we can get, and having schools and students involved, gives them a direct connection to the importance of that work. So yes, do reach out to us on that. We'll try to help you with that.
The other question I had was either Rich or Mark, the conversation around the river crossings and the survey of that. What's your anticipated timing on that, and what kind of coordination would you expect? Is that something you do with our Conservation Commission here? Is it something with the Board of Selectmen? How does that work?
So a lot of the initial work in our communities right now is being conducted by either the North Country Council, the Green Mountain Conservation Group, which is more down in the Ossipee area. New Hampshire Fish and Game is focused on the aquatic organism passage that Ken referenced earlier. And so you may be contacted, I would think, first by North Country Council as they work to do the public stream crossings, on the public roads in your community, both along 16 and also in the public town roads in Jackson. They won't do private stream crossings at this point, but you'll be notified by the group that's going to be doing that assessment work. And I'd have to look at my notes, but I think that they have already identified the number of crossings in Jackson that they're hoping to accomplish in this coming year. And there will be, outreach from North Country Council, probably to the Board of Selectmen first, to just make them aware that the work is going to happen, and that if people see, folks, standing around culverts and bridges, doing assessment work, that they're legitimate and they're supposed to be there. And then that information goes into a statewide database, which will then generate prioritization. There's a prioritization model that's already being developed that will help the towns identify the culverts and stream crossings in their communities that are in greatest need of restoration or modernization. And that work will be coming on in the next couple of years, but the assessment work will be happening starting this summer. And you should hear from North Country Council.
Okay.
Broadly, the workflow is from assessment and doing the aquatic organism passage, the geomorphic suitability, and the resilience to flooding. All of those things as a package in one unified assessment methodology. And then from there, the highest prioritized stream crossings be done in detailed survey and engineering design, and then eventually shovel ready projects for implementation. And that process starts with the assessment, which hasn't been done for many years.
Do you know if the assessment, the way that it's designed right now, will be taking a look at risk relative to your major arteries, i.e. Route 16, or in your case, Mark, Route 302, where we've got a lot of tanker trucks that are coming from Portland to move up into Berlin or up into Twin Mountain and further north? The reasons I raise the question is probably one of the greatest risks to the town of Jackson is its water supply is actually coming out of the Ellis for all practical purposes. And I do know that it was probably a decade or two back, they dumped an oil tanker over up at Dead Men's Curve right up at Pinkham's Notch. But that is potentially probably one of the greatest risks that Jackson actually has, is what's being carried, in particular because Portland, Maine is where the depot is, where the oil tankers fill up. I mean, the oil trucks fill up and then move from.
You're absolutely right, Ken, and that's certainly a concern here in Hart's location, especially sitting at the very headwaters of the Saco and the steep pitch, coming down through Crawford Notch by Elephant's Head. And, that's always been a great concern of mine as a selectman and living downstream of there. The same thing, a tanker accident could be really catastrophic. And, some of the planning for that happens on the local level with your select board and the hazard mitigation planning and the emergency operations plans that you probably already have in place. I know that in Hart's location and Bartlett, we addressed that issue. And then as far as the stream crossing assessments are concerned, I did fail to mention that DOT is a major player in all of this. And so they are also particularly involved with the stream crossing assessment work that's happening along those major corridors, like along Route 16 through Jackson and 302 here in Hart's location. So there are a number of players, and I think it's so hard to figure out a way to plan to prevent the sort of catastrophic accident that you're describing. And, knock on wood, it never happens. But, here in Hart's location, we have to grapple with, the increased amount of road salt that they put down on that steep pitch in the Notch. And while I hate to see that right next to the river, at the same time, they're keeping the road safe for those tankers and other, toxic materials that are passing through to not go off the road and into the river. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. But we'll try to keep that on the top of the, our awareness level in terms of our discussions with DOT and the other partners on the assessments as we go along.
All right, well, I do want to keep the time in mind. It sounds like there might be some follow-up discussion and questions, things that can be forwarded to you, Rich and Mark, via email. It looks like we might be looking out for that checklist coming our way that we can take a look at and give you some feedback on. And then we've talked about a couple of, potential projects and things that we can pursue ourselves. So really appreciate the presentation and your time and working through the technical difficulties, and it'll be great to see some productive things come out of all this. I'm really happy about it. So thanks. I think we have a couple of other things we should probably get to on our agenda, and you're welcome to stick around. But otherwise, we'll look forward to keeping in touch with you and working on what we can.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, all of you. And we'll be in touch.
Thanks so much for your attention. Thanks for all the good work.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, well, we got started a little bit late, and I think there are a couple of things we should at least touch on. I think there are other parts of the agenda that I put together that we don't have to go through tonight, or that I could summarize via email. In particular, I'm looking at the correspondence about Highland Farm. I think I can summarize some of those emails that I that I was involved in over the last couple of weeks via an email to all of you. I don't think it's something that's pressing at the moment, but just a couple of questions about that property. Looking at the Grays Inn issue, I did see that the planning board has a presentation about that property on their agenda for Thursday. Is that correct, Bill?
Yes.
So I guess I would suggest that, it might be good. I think I'll try to attend that meeting, and it might be good for other folks from the Conservation Commission if we're interested in hearing about thoughts regarding that property to make it to that meeting if possible.
Yeah, we have no more information, I think, than what you saw in the notes relative to the presentation. And Scott, you can probably talk to this better than I, but I think it's trying to open up a concept for a piece of property that the town owns, and whether or not there's any potential for actually using it in a different way than it's currently being used.
Just real quickly, it's really a thought in process, and we're not even thinking about using the entire property, only a portion of the property if we were to do anything. But we would welcome any feedback and ideas and comments, either at the planning board meeting or directly. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Scott and Bill. Does anyone else on the commission plan to attend that meeting on Thursday?
What time is that?
We start at 7, and that will be probably about 15 minutes into the discussion.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna head out. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks for coming, Bill. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill.
Ken, did you have an update that you wanted to share on the Prospect Farm general management plan?
My intention is to get out a draft to all committee members about a week before our next meeting in May, knowing that this meeting here was going to occupy most of the time. So if we don't have any other big agenda items, let's put that up as the next agenda item, and I will try to get out a full draft before, about a week before.
That sounds great. Thanks.
I did have a conversation with Forest Service this afternoon, but so I have some of that input as well to put into it.
All right. Okay, and then I did have some notes about Jackson Falls on there. I mean, just noticing obviously how quickly the snow has gone away, and potentially an opportunity to get out there and do some additional planting before before it starts to get busy up there. In the past, I think we've ended up doing it in June or July when it's obviously very hot and dry and busy. So wondering if we want to get on top of that a little bit earlier this year. And Pam, happy to hear your thoughts if you're still interested in leading that charge.
I am, and I'd like to get people's thoughts on maybe doing another planting. I was thinking down by the middle picnic table, there's a really big bare area there. Be nice to put I kind of like the mixed blueberry that we had from the first year as opposed to what we had this last year, just because it's mixed. Don't know how people feel about that.
And Pam, I haven't looked yet, but I wouldn't be surprised we're going to need to refresh the wood chips.
Yes, and with the wood chips, I think, just a thought. You guys did a great job spreading them last year, but I think it might be a little more helpful to make sure we keep them in the paths, just because I think people just walk over them wherever they are. Otherwise, didn't know if because I think that was what we were told by the soil scientist Greg Howard. He said, put the wood chips in the trail to keep the people on the paths and cover up the roots.
I thought that's what we were doing, which begs the question whether they're washing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of wood chips that are spread all over, some big open spaces.
Yeah.
So, it kind of like, it's almost like the wood chips are everywhere. And so people are walking everywhere. That's all. And they might be walking everywhere anyway. Just so, just a thought. And there's just a lot of traffic up there.
Yeah, I did a walk through a couple days ago, and I mean, I guess I walked away feeling that it looks, it's a substantial improvement over, what it looked like years ago. The wood chips do tend to get washed away a bit, but I think the wood chips being spread maybe broader than what we're calling the trails was maybe just to protect the root systems.
Yeah, so it may not
but
be a
I'm
bad
sure there
idea
is some
after all.
that's-
Yeah.
Yeah, I
It
mean,
may not be a bad. It may not be bad. Yeah.
I just walked away looking at where you'd planted the blueberries, where we had planted the two mixed blueberries, and the way it was, protected. It just looked like a real good improvement. So just felt good about it.
Yeah, it is fun putting the big, swath of those plants in. That's for sure. The sod.
Pam, do you want to see if you can get some more loads of wood chips and we can?
Yeah. How much do you think do you think we can plant? Do you think we can do 2 again?
2 pallets.
Yeah.
I would imagine we could find places to put it.
Are you talking wood chips or blueberry?
I asked about wood chips actually.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We can usually I can make a phone call to Ryman or another one of the tree guys, and they usually just donate them.
Yeah.
As long as we mark the correct spot, which I didn't do last time.
And what do you guys think about when you do the wood chips? If we can get more of, just a thought, get more of the evergreen rather than just wood. What do you guys think? I just noticed that from all the wind that we've had over the last few weeks, that a lot of the green tips have fallen into the trails in the woods, and that seems to provide a pretty nice cover.
Yeah.
I think the only difference there is that's natural.
Yeah.
Whereas the wood chips are an indicator as to where they're supposed to be. If you cover it up, I mean, I know the Jackson Ski Joint had real problems this winter because the trails get totally covered with pine needles, etc. But
yeah,
it would probably be good to cover those up so that the public knows where the trail is.
I can request, but we'll get what they have.
Yeah.
Depends depends what the tree work is and when they're local.
Right.
Would folks be interested in taking a walk out there at some point in the next few weeks?
That
Sure.
would be good, because the other thing I was thinking is that there's a lot of stuff that's fallen down, and I'd kind of like to make sure that Pat doesn't get around to picking things up, because we can always use that fallen stuff.
Yeah, there's a pretty good resource. We should get in there and probably take advantage of a couple of the larger pieces that have fallen. I moved a few things around just to cover up some of the paths we've been protecting, but there's
Right.
a number of good size limbs and that you could use a saw to actually really re-protect those old trails that we've since closed off.
Right. That would be good, because people move stuff all the time.
They do, yeah.
Maybe we'll target a nice day at some point next week or the week after. Does that sound good? I can send out a poll and see what works for everyone.
Sure.
That would be great.
Sounds good.
All right. Mike, any quick updates on the signage front?
No, I had kind of put everything on hold as we were waiting to see what the oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the citizens group, the Fall Citizens of
Oh.
Falls.
Yeah.
Save Jackson Falls.
Save Jackson Falls. Thank you. I was waiting to see, I didn't want to, I mean, everything like the map's done, and I've talked to the sign company, and we've got kind of blueprints for a kiosk, but I'd been kind of just waiting because I didn't want the Save Jackson Falls committee to go to the board and the board decides something that was either different or wouldn't be reflected on a sign. So I was kind of waiting for the final product or outcome of that to be resolved, just so that it was an agreement. I can't imagine there'd be anything terribly surprising, but I didn't want to, put something on the board that then they decide wasn't appropriate or missed something big. So it's kind of just in a holding pattern at the moment until I guess there's more resolution.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Do we have a draft at all, Mike? Like a dummy?
Of what it's gonna, like a mock-up of what it would look like?
Yeah.
Yeah, I sent something to Megaprint, and I can share it with you. I sent to them a while ago, and they basically said, thanks, we'll make it look better. And I said, thank you.
That would be cool to see.
Yeah. I'll take a look, and I can ask them. Maybe they can even make a mock-up for us and send us something. But the kind of the basic thing was map and then kind of guide, map on one side, guidelines on the other. And we had gone back and forth on, 2 panels. Well, I can't show that right. 2 panels. I just all I did was block my face. Sorry. 2 panels or like 1 panel. And that was kind of one of the things that we were talking about with Megaprint still.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think it makes sense to wait until everyone's on the same page with that. So we'll just keep circling back. All right, I think that's it. Unless there's any public comment from Will. Doesn't sound like it. Anything else from anyone?
I forgot. I was just going to mention if anyone does go to that meeting on Thursday and it comes up at all, I probably won't make it. But I just want the planning board to know that like this grammar school has been using the Gray's Inn property quite a bit, like the trail network and that area back there for outdoor lessons. So whatever, just so that they're aware of it, that it is getting used, that it has, I know the trail doesn't get a ton of use, but I know that local kids in the school have been using it. So something just for people to kind of keep in mind.
That's cool.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that use it in the winter for snowshoeing and stuff.
Yeah, well, I think I'll try to make it, and so I can definitely plan on passing that on if I'm there. And then, obviously the minutes will come out, but I can try to report back to anyone on anything of note.
Jeff, that's a Zoom meeting or is it in person?
I guess I assumed it was Zoom, but I don't know, to be honest.
I believe the planning board meetings are posted in Jackson E-News with a Zoom the same as our meetings.
Okay.
It should be.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks everyone. Sorry for the delay, but glad we made it through the meeting. And yeah,
I was going to say good recovery.
Yeah, good recovery, Jeff.
Well, I'll see how my phone data looks at the end of the month, but no.
You got a big budget.
It's all good. It's fine. Yeah, I'll send a poll out to see what time might work for everyone to get out to Jackson Falls. I think that'd be nice. We've been meeting on Zoom for almost a year. Well, no, I guess this is officially a year now. So,
wow.
Oh boy.
Cool.
So that'll be nice.
Will be.
Sounds good. Vote to adjourn the meeting. Do we have a motion for that?
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
All right, Brian makes the motion. See Mike seconds. All in favor, Brian?
Aye.
Ben?
Aye.
Tom?
Yes.
Ken? Mike?
Aye.
Hi.
Pam?
Aye.
I'm an aye, so the meeting is adjourned. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Have a good
Night,
night.
everyone.
You too.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.